Welcome to my channel, Cinder Shadow Gaming. I'm your host, Cinder Shadow, and I've got a deck tech for you today. So this deck tech revolves around the Witch's Oven and the Cauldron Familiar, but they're not the end-all be-all of the deck. It just happens to be one of the many combos with Throne of Eldraine that sits there and does quite a bit of work, but this is the deck that I've put it in and revolving around it. Just to go through it really quickly here, we have 4 Cauldron Familiar. This card, when this thing was spoiled, it was one of those things, ooh, I wonder if it's broken, if it can be broken, and it quite surely is with the Witch's Oven. For 1 black, it's a 1/1 cat. Whenever it enters the battlefield, they lose 1 life, you gain 1 life, but you can also sacrifice a food to bring it back from your graveyard. Then I run 3 Gilded Goose. It's a 1 green 0/2 bird, rare. It's flying. When it enters the battlefield, create a food token. For 1 green and generic, and tap it, you create a food token, and for tapping it, sacrifice a food, it creates 1 mana of any color. This is pretty much a new Birds of Paradise. It's one of those cards that when I saw it, I was like, that thing's a Birds of Paradise. It's going to be insane when it comes down to a standard meta. And I tell you, the little bit of a limitation of not having food on the board every once in a while is not the big of a deal, because when you first get this in your opening hand, creating that food, that little bit of mana ramp is really nice. So don't ever forget to bolt the bird, because it is a problem when it does come down to it. I see a lot of people ignoring this thing, and when they do, they usually do pay for it later. The Witch's Oven, a 1 casted artifact. You tap it, sacrifice a creature. Create a food token. If the sacrifice creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens. In a lot of cases, we're not ever going to sacrifice a creature with toughness 4 or greater. It can happen, but it's very seldom that it will happen. But that one little bit of a food token and the sacrifice effect is very powerful. With the new adventure cards, if you happen to sacrifice a creature with the adventure card being targeting that creature, it actually fizzles the spell, or the spell can't complete itself because it no longer has a target. So instead of it going to exile, it actually goes to people's graveyards. And there's been quite a few times where people go to try and kill something of mine, and I will sack it into the Witch's Oven, and then the card goes to the graveyard, messing up the tempo and the speed of their decks, because they're relying on those cards being in exile to be able to cast them more, and it really screws with them. Priest of the Forgotten Gods. Originally I did not have this in this deck, but it became more and more apparent, the sack outlet, the triggers and everything with the Priest of the Forgotten Gods, and the little bit of black ramp that you could do with this is huge. 1 black, 1 generic. It's a 1/2 human cleric creature. Tap it, sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. And then you add 2 black mana and draw a card. The 2 black mana, you need to remember, when it's there, you can use that 2 black mana to sacrifice a food token if you need the life back as well. So there's been cases where I do this in a response. In a lot of cases I will, and I'll have a food token on board. And instead of letting that black mana go to waste, I'll gain the 3 life from it. I'm running Assassin's Trophy as a 1-of, just to deal with some pesky artifacts or enchantments that just happen to be, or any problematic cards that are out there. Sometimes a Field of Dead, just to make them trade it up. It's a 1 black, 1 green, instant, destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle their library. Also Assassin's Trophy, big note here, since rotation has happened, a lot of people are now having to convert back to more basics in the deck, so you don't really want to use this so early in the game. This is something you want to draw into a little bit later, so when they get that land back, it's not going to make that big of a deal, because ramping your opponent within the first 4 turns can make or break your game. Then I run 2 Fine Fatality. The Fine side, black-green hybrid mana from 2 of them. You return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Or Finality. 1 green, 1 black, and 4 generic. You may put 2 1/1 counters on a creature you control, then all other creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. And in this deck, there's, this will hit most of your creatures, but usually at that point you want them dead anyway, just so you can start bringing them back. And this is a nice little board wipe in some of the other decks that are out there right now. So the Fine Fatality is really nice for both sides. Ayara, First of Locthwain, 3 black, 2/3 elf noble legendary creature. When she enters the battlefield or another black creature under your control, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. Tap her, sacrifice another black creature, draw a card. I do want to see what this is going to do in a Field of the Dead deck with all those zombies, and creating this many triggers with it could be potentially crazy. Maybe beside a Corpse Knight where you're getting double drain triggers. Who knows what else that you could do with that. The sacrifice of another black creature, draw a card. Once again, that's another sack trigger. It makes things very powerful for the deck, and always being able to draw those cards are nice. I run 3 Midnight Reapers in here. It's 1 black, 2 generic, 3/2 Zombie Knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, the Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. So a lot of times the Cauldron Familiar is bouncing in and out of your graveyard. You do negate that with it coming into play, so it is nice. You could kind of trade that 1 life that you would have gained for a card instead, which is a lot nice. But you don't want too many of these on the board at one time, because the extra damage for the card draw can kill you quite quickly, especially when you're down below 10 life, which you are quite frequently with this deck, I find. I run 3 Murderous Riders, but spend your wild cards on this Murderous Rider. It's probably one of the best removals in the entire set. 2 black and a generic. It's a 2/3 Zombie Knight with lifelink, but when it dies, it goes on the bottom of its owner's library. And it also has Swift and Instant Adventure, 2 black and a generic. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, you lose 2 life. The fact that this thing can hit a planeswalker is huge, because there is only so many cards that do hit planeswalkers right now, and this is one of them, and it is muchly needed. Flame Sweep is a very decent card in this deck. It does not hit a lot of your cards, and if it does, you want them to die anyway, so you can maybe bring them back. Dealing 2 damage to each creature, except for creatures you control with flying. Really, in your deck, or in this deck, it only hits the Cauldron Familiar or the Priestess of the Forgotten Gods. It does not hit the Gilded Goose because it is flying. So, in a lot of cases, you're benefiting running this, and it creates a bit of a board sweep for those other creatures that you need to deal with quickly. And especially in like a mono red deck where they got the Cavalcade going, this will clear that board out, and by time they've got a board presence completely up there, they're no longer drawing into cards anyway. And so this is an end game against red in particular. Bedevil, 2 black and a red, instant, destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. In a lot of cases, you're hitting planeswalkers with this. This is another planeswalker removal. I run 2 of them, mainly because of the red. We're not huge on the red in this deck, but when you do, it is quite nice with it. 4 Mayhem Devil. This is probably one of the biggest powerhouses in this deck right now. 1 red, 1 black, 1 generic, 3/3 Devil. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. Fabled Passage is one of those cards. If I had them, I would put them in the deck, but I don't have any Fabled Passage, just because of the sack trigger. In a lot of cases, you end up against people that have it. You have this down on the board, they don't realize sacking that permanent, this guy triggers, and if you have 2 or 3 of these on the board, it's devastating to a lot of players, and they don't quite know how to deal with it. You sack food tokens, you sack with the Priestess. This is a really good outlet for triggering. You could run also Angrath's Rampage, but I find it's not as reliable as Bedevil, because you then have to target them and they then choose if there's different creatures or different things out there. In a lot of cases, you want to only... You want to target what you want. You want the point removal. You don't want to give your opponents the choice of what they're going to sacrifice. Savvy Hunter, 2 of these. It just helps create food, and if you build up enough food, this also lets you draw cards. This is a 1 green, 1 black, 1 generic, human warrior, 3/3, whenever it attacks or blocks. Create a food token, sacrifice 2 foods, and draw a card. Once again, it's a card draw outlet. It is a very nice and handy way to draw your cards. I'm running 1 Rankle. I've thought about going up to 2. I've also only got 1 in my collection right now. Rankle, Master of Pranks, 2 black and 2 generic. This thing is pretty decent in this deck. He has Flying and Haste, 3/3. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. Each player discards a card. Each player loses 1 life and draws a card. And each player sacrifices a creature. And it goes in that order. You can choose 1, all, or just a couple of them in the order that they're listed on the card. Without the haste, this card would not be good. This thing is a target when it does hit the board, but a lot of times people have trouble dealing with it right away, because it is pretty decent. I do have 2 Castle Locthwains in here. It's just a card if you're stuck later on in a game and you need to draw out of it. This helps you draw and creates more of a draw trigger, and not having to rely on your creatures, because your creatures are bouncing in and out of the deck or in and out of the battlefield quite often, where this land, it's going to be there, and having that on a land is very nice. It also creates black. If you control a swamp, it comes in untapped. And in a lot of cases, you're not going to be running around without a swamp on the board. 1 swamp in here also. Witch's Cottage, I have 4 of them. You need 3 or more swamps. But we're also running the shocklands that do count as swamps. 2 mountain, 2 forest. We have Blood Crypts, which is black and red shockland. Overgrown Tomb, the green, black shockland. 1 Temple of Malady. You could maybe go up to 2, but you don't really want this coming in tapped in a lot of cases. These Scrylands are okay, but when they come into tapped and you need that land, it makes things a little bit more difficult. And enforce Stomping Grounds just for the reliability of the red land and green, because they're not so solely in this deck. It's the red-green shockland. This deck is performing pretty well for me. I was playing it in the Mythic League. Of course, we had rotation today, and things were quite well for me. In my bonus packs that I did gain, I did get a Castle Locthwain and a few other cards that I will be building around and hopefully making a future deck tech out of. And, you know, before we get into the gameplay, I do have that for you guys as a special treat. Next, me opening those extra packs. Some good stuff we're getting here. Doom Foretold, great. One of the most broken cards in the new set. Oathsworn Knight. That's my 3rd one, I believe.
I'm certain you're quite charmed.
Yeah, we got an Oko. Oko. Couple packs left. Oh, Stolen by the Fae. That's another one that I've got a few of already. And... oh, 2 Okos! 2 Okos! That is epicness. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little bit of a jackass at the end there, sandbagging my ass. Really sucked, but, you know, I sped that up to 10 times the speed at the end there, just so it wouldn't drag on. It is a pretty good deck, I find. It probably could use some tweaking. I'm not entirely sure where to go with the deck, but it seems to run pretty well. The cost basis for this deck is probably quite a bit up there, with the riders being close to $20 right now, and also all the shocklands. I get a value of about $250 for this deck. Could you run this a little bit cheaper? Maybe if Bedevil is cheaper than the Murderous Rider. You got to remember, Murderous Rider is taking the place of Vraska's Contempt. And it's also on a body, so that card's going to be up there for quite a while. I don't see that card coming down in price. It's probably, like I said, one of the best removals in the new standard, and going forward you're going to see a lot more with the card. Also, opening those 2 Okos, that's going to open me up for some more jankiness, because I know there is the Oko food deck out there right now that Magic Aids did showcase quite well, I think, before rotation happened, and going forward we're going to see a lot more with that, I think. I'm hearing Simic Food has become a thing, looking like it's one of the top tier decks now. Also, Dance of the Manse with Doom Foretold is probably going to be the deck to beat now, as that thing is completely busted. Like I said, back when Dance of the Manse was spoiled, it was going to be a complete and utter nightmare. It is pretty much Coco for the graveyard for artifacts and enchantments. It's a Coco mixed with Rally of the Ancestors. We're back to the Coco Rally deck, but instead of it being tiny-ass creatures coming back to the board, it's all these artifacts and enchantments that completely ruin the game. So do be on the lookout for that. I believe they're running Esper colors. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I hope to put out a few more of these deck tech videos as Throne of Eldraine goes forward. And I'd just like to put a special thanks out to all my patrons and everyone else out there. You guys are great and been helping me through tough times with the channel and with everything going on in my life right now. And I hope going forward things can maybe get back to a routine. I still don't know what the job future holds, so we'll see what goes on. I might be flipping burgers by the end of October. Who knows? Anyway, guys, have a great time, and we will see you again.